we're moving on to the next thing here. Final Fantasy XVI producer doesn't like the term JRPG. Now, this is actually pretty interesting, guys. Yoshi P has said that JRPG feels like a discriminatory term when he first heard it. Now, I'm sure all you guys have heard of the term JRPG versus like a Western RPG. Even I've talked about it. And actually in the last Let's Play, I even mentioned the term JRPG, saying there was a time during the, during like the Xbox 360 era where Western role-playing games were dominant and the Japanese games they weren't in such good times as they are these days. I wonder if there's something interesting we can pinpoint here, and I can find something interesting too, like a quote. I want to hear the quote. There's the quote. Okay, cool. Found the quote. Okay. So, at one point, Skill Up asked Yoshida about a previous comment he made about how action game genre had advanced and now the norm, and if he was implying that JRPGs hadn't advanced in the same way. Skill Up explained that it seemed Yoshida didn't like the phrasing of the question, to which his translator said, "The thing that Yoshida wants to get across is that when we are creating games, at least with our team, we don't go into them thinking that we're going to be creating JRPGs. We just go into them thinking we're going to create RPGs." When asked to elaborate, Yoshida said, "This is going to depend on who you ask, but there was a time when this first appeared 15 years ago." Okay, so this is old. So there was a time when this term first appeared 15 years ago, and for us as developers, the first time we heard it, it was like a discriminatory term, as though we were being made fun of for creating these games. And so, for some developers, the term JRPG can be something that will maybe trigger bad feelings because of what it was in the past. It wasn't a compliment to a lot of the developers in Japan, he continued. We understand that recently JRPG has better connotations and it's being used as positive, but we still remember the time when it was used as negative. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I don't know if anybody in the chat here has any opinions on that. I personally have said JRPG a lot. You know, it's because it's a term I'm used to seeing other people say online, and that's interesting. That is a very interesting thing because I can see that. And I almost feel like he's saying 15 years ago. It's like 2005 would have been like the PlayStation 2 era, and that kind of makes sense where it was being JRPGs. The term JRPG just said RPG. Right. It's because we're being called weebs. I think maybe weebs are part of the problem. Like, maybe weebs not only... maybe they embraced the term before the actual people that made the games. That's an interesting point, but I only know it's a compliment since I wasn't big into RPGs before that, but I get it. Yeah, and that's the thing, is I think, like, a lot of times when people talk about JRPGs, they mean it in a positive light, because, just, I don't know, the game development in general, it just definitely has to be different in Japan. The productions are different. The way that, I think I was watching a YouTube video about this just the other day that kind of mentioned, in JRPGs, a lot of times the producers and stuff are held to a bigger light. Like, for example, Yoshida here is the producer of, or director or whatever, of Final Fantasy XVI, and also was the director of Final Fantasy XIV, and people know that about him. Like, it feels like they almost hold him in the same light as like a movie director or something. You know what I mean? And I don't feel like that is the same in games made in, at least in the United States. It's like no one is really talking about who the director of some modern Halo game is or whatever, some AAA game. Maybe they are. I don't know if that's true or not. Like, let's say, what's a big release? Like God of War. God of War was a really big release last year, or whatever. But like, do people know who the director is? I don't, but I know a lot of Final Fantasy fans, you know, are constantly name dropping like people like Tetsuya Nomura or Yoshida, who direct these really popular games. I don't know. So I don't know if I don't know if it was meant to be discriminatory, but I can see how it would have come across that way. And obviously in Japan it's probably completely different, you know. But there was definitely a period of time where people weren't into stuff like Final Fantasy or even Pokemon as much, and games like Mass Effect and Skyrim and these more Western RPGs, if you will, were more dominant. And yeah, I guess that's it. I guess that's just my interesting little intro segment, guys. Did you like that? That's what our intro segment is for today. Let's move on, guys. Well, unless you got anything to say in the chat. But when I think about it, when it was a negative term to them, if that term wasn't used, you would have just said a Japanese RPG, whether positive or negative, right? Yeah, I don't know. I just don't... I do feel like they are correct in, like, in the Super Nintendo era, the era of, like, Final Fantasy VI and IV, and Final Fantasy III, and Dragon Quest, those weren't called JRPGs, those were just RPGs. And to be honest, there weren't a whole lot of Western companies making video game RPGs at the time. Being a genre mostly based around, like, Dungeons and Dragons rules and stuff, there are Western RPGs, I guess I should say. PC was popular with Western RPGs in, man, that, like, early 90s era, late 80s. Stuff like Ultima, but it's very different than the console JRPGs. I just said it. I just said it. I shouldn't say it anymore. Maybe I shouldn't say it anymore. It is used mostly positive these days, yeah. It is used mostly as positive. So it is kind of interesting. Interesting read. Interesting topic.